Hello, everybody. Welcome back to AP World History with Mr. Ansharsky. Today, we are going to look at the later Qing Dynasty. We'll look at the developments in China by the end of the 19th century. So the bellwork right now on the screen, identify a challenge facing the Russian and the Ottoman empires in the 19th century. What's similar, what's different about these two places? That's what you should consider before you start answering this question. So today we're going to start chapter 5 of unit 6. We'll talk about the later Qing Dynasty. We talked about its rise in unit 4. Sorry, I can't remember all these units. And today we'll look at some struggles that it's facing by the end of the 19th century. So today, same objective as yesterday, but still a unique and distinct lesson, daily summary. So explain how various economic factors contributed to the development of the global economy from 1750 to 1900. So what does the Qing Dynasty look like? Well, we talked about its origins way back in Unit 4. How it is going to emerge out of the Ming Dynasty. And remember, the Qing are a group of Central Asian nomads. They are the Manchu. And the Manchu are going to invade the Ming Dynasty in the 1600s and establish a dynasty that will be our last dynasty in Chinese history, unfortunately. Well, I mean, depending on how you feel about these Chinese dynasties. If you're a peasant, you probably don't like them. But anyway, the Qing Dynasty is our last major dynasty, and they are mostly going to be of the Manchu people. However, by the 19th century, we are seeing a period of decline in the Qing Dynasty. We are going to see several social, economic, and political problems. So let's take a gander at the social problems. Well, we've got ethnic tension in the Qing Dynasty. Mostly this is between the ruling Manchu. So remember, they're the Central Asian nomads who took over the Ming Dynasty. And then the majority of people in China belonging to the Han or the Han ethnicity. Someone always makes fun of me for my Chinese pronunciation. I don't speak Chinese. But one of these Chinese groups that isn't Han ethnicity, that's a subgroup in the Han ethnicity, belongs to the Hakka ethnicity. They're primarily going to be in the south of China, in the Canton province. And these ethnic tensions are going to be most apparent in the Canton province, as we will see, which will become very relevant today in our presentation. In addition, we see famines, we see food shortages and natural disasters. There are floods. The levee keeps breaking when it keeps on raining. I messed up that joke right there. I'm sorry. But anyway, there are social problems in the later Qing Dynasty, especially these ethnic tensions, while we also have food shortages, which is not helping anything. But in addition, we have economic problems as well. Not only do we have ethnic divisions and tensions, we have wealth inequality. So there is an extremely wealthy upper class, and among the various peasants and workers in China, there is a lot of poverty. So we have extreme amounts of wealth inequality. And on top of this, we are seeing a lot of overcrowding in urban centers. So under the Ming Dynasty, we saw a lot of urbanization. Same thing with the early Qing Dynasty. But we see extreme social problems as a result of rapid urbanization in China during the Qing Dynasty. But all the while, the Chinese economy is going to experience ups and downs as it will be involved in the wider European-dominated global economy. We are going to see increasing European presence in China, mostly these Europeans are looking to establish spheres of influence. That's the thing to associate with China in this age of imperialism. Spheres of influence. So we are seeing gradually the economy being dominated by European companies, by American companies as well. This is a tag team effort on the part of the West. So we have economic problems in addition to these social ones. What's going on politically? Well, there's going to be a lot of corruption in the Qing Dynasty. We are going to see instances of corruption, even though we have that civil service exam in place to prevent corruption. We do see bribery and nepotism, all those wonderful, terrible things. And in general, all of this is contributing to a great mistrust of the government in China, especially as the government has failed to address these social problems and these economic problems. So generally, there is vast amounts of disillusionment in China during the later Qing Dynasty. But today we're going to look at two instances of violence in China that will assist in bringing down the Qing Dynasty. The first one we'll look at is something we've actually built up to, weirdly enough, all these units. It's the Opium Wars. So let's just give a little background for the Opium Wars before we talk about what they are and how they will affect Chinese history. Well, we have to go back to the earliest introduction of European traders, of merchants in China. Remember, the Qing are notable in Chinese history for opening up China for economic trade, for a European presence to be there. However, the Qing are going to limit European traders to just the Canton province in southern China, the little bit of red right here. So the Canton system is allowing European and American business to occur. And yet, this is the only spot right now that any trade can occur between Europe and China. So there is an allowance for trade, sure, but it is heavily restricted by the Qing Dynasty. But what are the Europeans bringing, and what do the Chinese want? Well, there is a demand still for American silver from the Americas. There is generally only two things the Chinese want. It's opium and silver. So opium and silver are the things the Chinese want, but really all these European countries have run out of silver. You know what? They have, as a result of imperialism, it's opium. And opium is going to be demanded in China mostly because there are those intense social and economic challenges. So oftentimes with drug addiction, and not to get on a soapbox here, but it is a reflection of lower socioeconomic status, sort of to alleviate the downfall of your economic status is through opiates, like opium in this case. So we have across class lines, not only among poor people, poor peasants, but also among the wealthy elite in China. We are going to see a craze essentially for opium. It's seen as a fashionable thing in the elite circles, and in the lower classes, it's seen as a way to escape worldly suffering. It is the literal opium of the people, to quote Karl Marx there. And where are the Chinese getting this opium from? Well, it's from different Europeans, but it's mostly from the British. The British, as you remember, control India. India, and especially the Bengal region, especially in Afghanistan, this is a great place to grow opium. And you can see an opium flower right here. It's called a poppy. So the British are growing opium, and to trade with China, they are selling this opium in exchange for Chinese goods, those wonderful things like silver and porcelain and Well, not so much gunpowder. The Europeans can make that themselves at this point. But definitely porcelain and silk and tea. Let's be real, they're British after all. So really, India is used as a stepping stone, if you will, for trade with China, especially with the production of opium. And the Chinese under the Qing are going to recognize this widespread opioid crisis. Well, I kind of got ahead of myself and anachronized that, but there is a problem of opium addiction in China. And the Qing are going to say, okay, this has gone too far. We're outlawing opium. We'll punish anybody who smokes this poppy. So at first, the Qing dynasty will outlaw this sell of opium, this drug trade, essentially. And yet, let's think about what the British will think about this. Well, remember that in Great Britain and across industrial Europe, there is this feeling of laissez-faire capitalism, and that any restriction on trade is a restriction on capitalism, on trade. So the British are going to be not in support of following this ban on opium. They are going to smuggle opium into China to make a quick profit. And mostly this will be in the Canton region again. So we are going to see vast amounts of smuggling, not only by the British, but Americans and other European powers as well. Opium is the way to get rich in China. But eventually, the Qing dynasty is going to have a stronger stance on the opium trade. So we are going to see in the 1830s, the Qing dynasty deliberately destroying opium shipments. They're searching them down, going through British and other European ships and searching for opium. And if they find opium, well, throw it overboard. So the Chinese are going to deliberately destroy this opium trade. However, as I said before, this is seen by the British as a violation of free trade. This is clearly a restriction on markets. And if you're a laissez-faire capitalist, you don't like that. So this is going to be met with a military response by the British. The British want the Chinese to allow the sale of opium. The Chinese say no, and guess what the British do? They go to war with the Qing dynasty. And it's going to initiate a period of history referred to as the Opium Wars. And you guessed it, it's about opium. Very cleverly named. I love whoever made this name. Unless his name was, no, never mind, I don't know. I was trying to make a joke there, but you know what? I'm tired too. Anyway. So we do see series of conflicts between the British and the Qing dynasty. I had to sneeze. Oh, I'm repressing it. All right. So the British are going to engage in a series of struggles against the Chinese. And yet the Chinese are not going to win in these wars. In fact, why do they not win? Well, they might have gunpowder, sure, but everyone has gunpowder at this point. What China lacks is an industrial military. That is a military using all of these wonderful techs like repeating rifles and trains and railroads, I should say, telegraphs. The Chinese don't have this. You know who does? It's the British. The British will use their superior navy, especially, to force the Chinese to surrender. So, as a result of the industrialized military that the British have, this is going to lead to a very easy British victory. So, as a result of unequal combat, the British win. And they're going to force the Chinese to surrender. They will enforce a treaty. And this treaty is known as the Treaty of Nanking, or Nanjing, if you want to feel fancy. So this will end the first Opium Wars. And I'm sorry to say, but there's another Opium War. But the Treaty of Nanking is ending this first Opium War. And arguably, this is the most important treaty in our time period for China. Essentially, what the treaty stipulates is four things. For one thing, the British can trade wherever they please. They can trade in new spheres of influence in places not just in Canton, but in Beijing, in the capital of China, in the north of China. So the British have a special trading status in China. They can trade freely, no restrictions on their economic presence. On top of this, the British are going to say, China, you can't restrict the opium trade. I know everyone's getting addicted, but you can't restrict that. After all, if you do that, you're limiting economic choice. That doesn't sound very cash money, i.e., laissez-faire of you. So China is not allowed to restrict the opium trade, according to the Treaty of Nanking. On top of this, the Chinese have to pay for all of this war. Okay. Well, let me explain. So the Chinese are going to damage a lot of British private property. So the British will force the Chinese to have some sort of compensation. And on top of this, the British are going to get a little bit of territory out of all of this. China, for the most part, won't be politically dominated by Europeans. But there is going to be some territory given to European powers. For Britain, it's going to be Hong Kong. Hong Kong will become a British extraterritoriality, and we'll talk about what that means in a second. But now we got Hong Kong as a British colony, a place where the British have free reign to sell whatever they want, and from Hong Kong, all of this stuff goes to China. So these are the four big results of the Nanking Treaty, the Treaty of Nanking. The way that, never mind, I won't say that. I was going to talk about opium actually being taken, but I won't talk about that. I do say, Lawrence, these aren't clarinets. Well, the name the First Opium War might ring a little bit suspicious. It means that there'll be a second Opium War. And basically what happens here is China is going to try to say, okay, we got beat. Let's reclaim our national honor. Let's assert our independence from these economic forces like the British. So the Chinese are going to initiate yet another war against the British sellers of opium. But this time, the British aren't alone in this war. The British got help from the French and the Americans. And the French and the Americans, they're looking to set up their own spheres of influence. So American and French support will lead to yet another Western victory over China. And again, this is because of unequal combat. The Chinese haven't really industrialized. It was that fear of Westernization from a Neo-Confucian bureaucracy. So the Chinese lose yet again. And as a result, we are going to see yet more spheres of influence in China, not only with the Americans and the British and the French, but the Germans and the Japanese and the Russians. They will also claim spheres of influence in China. So the Opium Wars have allowed for more Western influence in China. I got an email. And on top of this, we are going to see a very weakened political state in China. The Qing Dynasty will become politically weakened as a result of the Opium Wars. And this is going to lead to calls for change in China. We need to modernize to prevent future conflict with the Euro trash, the Europeans. I didn't say Euro trash. But the Opium Wars are significant culturally in China because it is going to increase resentment of the West in favor of Chinese traditionalism and, what we will see, Chinese nationalism. And primarily, the Chinese are upset about these extraterritorialities. These are places where foreigners are exempt from the Chinese, basically. They have free reign to do what they want. They can abuse Chinese women without recompense, without any sort of legal consequence. They can sell whatever they want, i.e., opium. They can spread Christianity. And in these extraterritorialities, we do see a significant European presence. We are going to see what we call expatriates in China. And these expatriates live in secluded European communities. Basically, what the Europeans do are set up little bitty Europes in China that are independent from the Chinese government. So sure, China will not be politically controlled by Europe, but it has significant economic control over the Chinese economy. And we call this resentment of the West and the so-called defeated nature of the Chinese in Chinese historical tradition, the century of humiliation. So a time when China was beaten and picked on by Europe and Japan, as we'll see later on. And it noticeably ends in 1949. I wonder what happens then. Well, I don't want to spoil it, so we'll see. So consider, what are some challenges faced by the Qing Empire? What were the Opium Wars? Why do they matter? Well, we're going to see another period of instability in China. And this is going to have an impact on future developments in China. So we're going to take a look at the Taiping Rebellion real quick and what's going on here. Well, let's get some context in this biz real quick. So we do have, especially in the Canton region, in the Canton province, extreme anti-Western sentiment. China is feeling we have been beaten and prodded and poked and stamped on by these European powers. So there is a lot of resentment towards Europe, especially towards merchants. These merchants, they can do whatever they want in their extraterritorialities. Missionaries are somewhat welcomed because, on the one hand, they are encouraging a sense of an afterlife, this idea of things will be better one day. We'll all be equal in heaven, essentially. So missionaries do have a presence, especially in the Canton region. So we have a lot of missionaries in the Canton province. But the Canton province is where we see the most poverty and the most social and economic tensions. So the Canton province is going to see a lot of social pressure, a lot of social tension, especially between the wealthy and the poorest peasants. And on top of that, it's in the Canton region that we are going to see a lot of ethnic conflict. In the Canton region, the Hakka ethnicity, this sort of Han subdivision, is going to heavily resist rule by the Manchu Qing. So it's in this condition, this atmosphere of economic tensions, of the influence of Christian missionaries who preach equality in the afterlife, and all of these social ethnic tensions that we are going to see these tensions spill out into an all-out civil war, a rebellion. And this rebellion is known as the Taiping Rebellion. It's led by this dude right here in the bronze, a gentleman by the name of, I misplaced my pronunciation guide. I'm going to do my best as a white man to pronounce this man's name. His name is Hung Kui Quan. That's what I'm going to call him. Hung Kui Quan was a Chinese peasant. He failed the civil service exam, unfortunately. But in his desperation, he is going to appeal to religion, specifically to Christianity. He is going to find comfort in Christianity, especially in this idea of social equality under God. So Qiquan is going to establish a religious cult where he's going to claim he's actually the brother of Jesus. And as the brother of Jesus, he wants to bring the kingdom of heaven on earth. We don't have to wait for the afterlife. Let's establish it now. And he's going to call this cult, this religion, the Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace, which is a wonderful name. It's a combination of Chinese culture, of Chinese tradition, and Christianity. That idea of equality under God, of social equality, that is what Qiquan is offering in the Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace. And as we're going to see, there's going to be a lot of followers to this religion. A religion that's preaching an end to, guess what? Poverty, to social and ethnic tensions. We're all equal. So this is the origins of the Taiping Rebellion. Let's see it actually unfold. Well, the Taiping Rebellion is going to make inroads, especially among landless Chinese peasants in the Canton region, mostly as it is offering a solution to a lot of problems in China. The Taiping Rebellion will view itself as an alternative to the Qing Dynasty. We are going to see the Taiping leaders like Qiquan offer things like land redistribution. Let's give peasants land. Everyone loves that. Well, peasants love that, not landed elites or aristocrats. So they are offering a solution to economic problems by giving land to peasants. On top of this, the Taiping Rebellion is encouraging social equality. No one is better than anyone else. We have a system where there's no ethnic group that dominates. We have an equal society. That is what the Taiping Rebellion wants. They want a society based on egalitarian Christian values. It's actually kind of communistic when you think about it. It is what some Western Marxists would call proto-communism. So it's a classless society, but it's not necessarily an industrial one, or one that Marx would have envisioned, essentially. And finally, the Taiping Rebellion wants an end to the Manchu rule over ethnically Han Chinese people. They hate this idea of Manchu superiority. And eventually the Taiping Rebellion is going to make inroads. It will have a lot of followers, especially among landless peasants in the Canton region. And slowly but surely, we are going to see the development of a more formal organization that will resist militarily the Qing Dynasty. We are going to see the creation of a military under the direction of the Taiping leaders. So we are going to see an organized army. It's going to organize so quickly by both willing conscripts and not so willing conscripts. So as much as the Taiping Rebellion wants a classless society, they are going to be very brutal and recruiting people towards their cause, which is going to lead to a lot of violence and death. And eventually the Taiping are going to organize a military that will take over the Nanking, that will take over Nanjing, which is an important trading city for the Chinese. And in Nanjing, this is where the Taiping will establish an independent country, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. Who knew heaven was a place on earth? This isn't the 80s, okay. So this is what's going on and why the Taiping will gain followers. And yet, the Taiping Rebellion is noticeable for its extreme loss of life. It is a very brutal civil war, not only between the Qing government and the Taiping leaders, but between different groups of Chinese in China. So we are going to see brother turning against brother, neighbor versus neighbor. All of this about who do you support? Do you support the rebels? Do you support the government? It's a very brutal war. On top of the military deaths, we have a lot of famine as a result of all of these disruptions. The lowest estimate for how many people died in the Taiping Rebellion is 20 million. And as comparison, the lowest estimate for how many people died throughout the world during World War I was 22 million. The highest estimate for the Taiping Rebellion, 40 million people. A significant amount of dead within China. So we have these military deaths, but we also have frequent bandit raids that will disrupt trade, not only for economic trade, but also the exchange of food. We are going to see a lot of famine, which will contribute to this death toll. And eventually, all of this is going to come under the notice of Europe. Europe is going to say, oh my God, the Chinese can't handle themselves. Let's send in some troops to help out the government so we can still have stability, so we can still have trade. So this support for the Qing Dynasty will be expressed in military support. The French, the British, the Americans, the Germans, they send troops to help the Chinese government. And specifically, they help take back the city of Nanjing. And the reprisals against the Chinese rebels are very, very brutal. This contributes again to this massive death toll. So the Taiping Rebellion is put down very brutally. All of its leaders executed, and 20 million up to 40 million people dead in China. Well, what does this all mean to China? Well, as you might well imagine, the death of so many people is going to weaken China politically. How will it recover from the loss of 20 million people? Well, the Qing government is going to realize we need to make serious changes to prevent something like this ever happening again. So the Qing dynasty is going to come to the realization it needs to modernize to strengthen its political system. So what inspired the Taiping Rebellion? What are some of the goals? How were the peasants, the rebels, I should say, defeated? And what's the significance of the Taiping Rebellion? I don't know. You know. Well, I mean, I do know, but it's your turn to know. And we'll finally wrap up talking about some moderate attempts to reform the Chinese dynasty, to reform the Qing dynasty. China has a lot of problems, not going to lie. The Qing government is bankrupt from fighting this war against rebels. We still don't have any industrialization. Our economy is based off exporting raw materials, and all of our industrial goods were British originally. We're not going to see any industrialization in China, unfortunately. And on top of this, all of this political instability and economic instability will lead to a depopulation of China in the form of immigration. We are going to see a lot of Chinese move away from China. They'll go to places like the US of A, baby. They'll go to Indonesia as indentured servants. They'll go to the Philippines as indentured servants. Similarly, they'll go to Hawaii as well. Of course, these immigrants do face a very hostile reaction, especially in the United States, but there are significant push motivations to leave China. So the Qing dynasty is going to realize we need to make some changes. We need to adopt some reform. But the Qing are also going to say, no, let's not westernize some aspects. Clearly, China's been around for a while, so let's keep things traditional. Well, what are some of these attempts at reform? Well, in terms of westernization, There are attempts to westernize the Chinese military, to buy military goods, guns, from European powers to arm the Chinese. So in the military, we see westernization. We'll see that with this guy right here, especially Zheng Gaofan. And Gaofan is going to, well, I guess Zheng would be his first name or his last name, wouldn't it? Never mind. Well, Zheng is going to go to Europe and study at European military schools. Zheng is going to bring back what he learned, and as an important advisor to the Chinese emperors, he is going to share his findings of how the Chinese military can modernize, especially to defend China against rebels or the occasional European military intervention. On top of this, the Chinese want to reform its economy. They want to encourage industrialization, the building of railroads especially. That's always where industrialization tends to start in new imperialized countries. So we are going to see the building of railroads, of some very few factories, especially in the coast of China. And yet, on the political and social spectrum, we are going to see the idea of maintaining tradition, maintaining a strict control over Chinese society, preventing those notions of social equality those Christian commies basically wanted. So we are going to see the strengthening of Chinese traditionalism as a way to enforce a social hierarchy and a political hierarchy, with the emperor clearly an agent of the divine on earth. So this is to encourage, or I should say discourage, feelings of social and ethnic tensions. And this is going to be especially expressed in the reign of Qi, is how I'll pronounce her name. She is actually going to be the Empress of China. She's one of a few female rulers of China. And she is going to initiate this campaign of westernizing the military and the economy, whereas she will also traditionalize society and politics. And she calls this movement the self-strengthening movement. It is basically securing China's military and economy while also promoting a strict social hierarchy to prevent rebellion. And as we're going to see, that won't work out so well when we talk about the creation of the Chinese Republic. But we'll talk about that more later. So I have two videos about China. One is about the Taiping Rebellion. So look through those on your free time. Thank you for watching. This is the second to last presentation of Unit 6. Thank you so much. Bless you. Have a great day. I'm Jeff Goldblum. It's me. I'm Jeff Goldblum. I never get to do my impressions in class. I'm bad at them, but yeah. Well, that's my outro today. Me doing an impression of Jeff Goldblum. Sorry, I'm in a silly, goofy mood. All right, go away. You're all terrible. Just kidding.